I didn't expect to cry on the plane, but somewhere over Indiana, somewhere between the window and the clouds, I pressed my hand against the cold glass and let it happen quietly so the man in the aisle seat wouldn't notice. I had done everything right. I was sure of it. My daughter turned 40 that October, 40 years old. I remember the morning she was born like it was a Tuesday last week, the smell of the hospital, the way the nurse placed her in my arms and said, "She's a strong one," and how I looked down at that red, squirming face and thought, yes, she is. She absolutely is. I raised her to be. Her name is Diane. She lives in Scottsdale now. She moved there 6 years ago after she married her second husband, a man named Trevor who works in commercial real estate and wears the kind of shoes that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it because it matters later. Because everything I'm about to tell you is connected to the distance between where Diane started and where Diane decided she wanted to be. I live in Dayton, Ohio. I'm 67 years old. I taught 4th grade for 31 years before I retired, and I raised 2 children mostly on my own after my husband Richard passed from a stroke when Diane was 19 and her brother was 16. I didn't ask for help. That's not how we did things. I worked, I showed up, I kept the lights on and the refrigerator full, and I made sure both of my children graduated from college without a dollar of debt, because Richard had left us a small life insurance policy, and I spent every cent of it on their futures, instead of my own comfort. I don't say that for applause. I say it because it is simply what happened. It is what mothers do. When Diane called me in August to tell me about the party, the big 40th, the one Trevor was throwing for her at a venue in Scottsdale, catered, live music, 200 guests, she sounded excited in the way she sounds when she wants me to be excited too, but doesn't quite have time to explain why. She said, "Mom, you have to come." She said, "It won't be the same without you." She said, "I'm putting you on the guest list right now," and I pictured her on the phone, with one hand already reaching for something else, the way she does. I told her I would be there. I meant it with everything I had. I booked my own flight. I didn't ask her to pay for it. The round trip from Dayton to Phoenix was $412, which is not nothing on a teacher's pension, but I didn't hesitate. I booked the ticket the same afternoon she called. I also booked a hotel 2 miles from the venue, because I didn't want to impose on their guest room, even though they have 3. I didn't want to be in the way. Then I started thinking about what to bring. Diane had everything she needed. Trevor had made sure of that. Their house in Scottsdale has a kitchen that looks like it belongs in a magazine, all white marble and brushed gold fixtures, and Diane had told me once, gently but clearly, that she'd replaced most of her old things when she moved in with Trevor. The blender I gave her for Christmas 2 years ago was still in the box. She'd admitted on a phone call, and she said it like she was apologizing, but I understood. She had a different life now, a nicer one. But there was one thing I had that she didn't. One thing money couldn't replace. My mother's recipe tin. It's an old red metal tin, the kind with the sliding lid, and it's been in our family since before I was born. Inside are my mother's handwritten recipe cards, her handwriting in faded blue ink, her notes in the margins, her little arrows and corrections from decades of making the same dishes better. The chocolate cake recipe that she made for every birthday in our family, going back to 1962. The one Diane had asked me to make every year of her childhood, the one she had requested at her own wedding rehearsal dinner, the one that she had once told me, "You have to promise me you'll teach me how to make this someday, Mom." I decided I would bring the tin, not give it permanently, just bring it, and spend a morning before the party making the cake together, the way my mother had done with me when I was young. I thought Diane would love that. I thought it would be the kind of gift that a catered venue and 200 guests couldn't offer. I also brought her a card with a check inside. Not a large check, but a meaningful one, and a photograph I had found while cleaning Diane at age 4, sitting on Richard's shoulders in the backyard, squinting into the sun with her whole face smiling. I had it framed in a simple silver frame. I thought she might want to have it. I landed in Phoenix on a Friday afternoon in October. The air hit me like an open oven door when I walked out of the terminal, even with the season turning, and I stood on the curb with my suitcase and my carry-on, and the tin carefully wrapped in my tote bag, and I called Diane to let her know I'd arrived. She didn't answer. I called again 20 minutes later from the rental car. Still nothing. I sent a text. I drove the 45 minutes to Scottsdale and checked into my hotel room and sat on the edge of the bed and told myself she was busy. She was throwing a party for 200 people. Of course she was busy. She texted me back at 6 that evening. "So sorry, Mom, insane day. Trevor's parents are in town, and we've been doing the whole welcome dinner thing. I'll call you tomorrow morning, okay? So glad you're here." I read that text 3 times. Trevor's parents were in town. They were doing a welcome dinner. I had flown from Dayton to Phoenix and was sitting in a hotel room 2 miles away, and no one had thought to include me in the welcome dinner. I ordered room service, a bowl of soup and some bread. I watched the local news and tried not to think too hard about what I was feeling, because I've learned that when you start to name the feeling too clearly, it takes on a shape you can't easily put back. She called me the next morning at 9:30. She sounded rushed and warm at the same time, the way Diane does when she's trying to be 2 things at once. She said she was so sorry about the night before, that it had all gotten away from her, that she couldn't wait to see me. She said, "Come over at noon. We'll have lunch before everything starts tonight." And I felt the thing in my chest loosen, just a little. I thought, okay, here we are. Here is where it begins properly. I drove to their house with the tin on the seat beside me. I had even looked up whether I could use their kitchen to start the cake. The party wasn't until 7, so there was plenty of time. I had all the ingredients in a paper bag. Flour, Dutch processed cocoa, the specific vanilla extract my mother always used. When I arrived, the driveway already had 4 cars in it. I recognized Trevor's SUV and Diane's car, but the other 2 I didn't know. I rang the doorbell and Trevor answered with a smile that was perfectly pleasant and said, "Carol, great, come in. Diane's just finishing something up." He took my bag, not the tin. I kept that and led me through the entryway and into the kitchen, and that is when I understood the shape of the day. Trevor's mother was at the kitchen island. She is a woman named Lorraine, and she is 63 and looks 50, because she has the kind of time and money that makes that possible, and she was standing at the marble counter with a glass of sparkling water, giving instructions to a woman who appeared to be a hired event coordinator. On the table, spread out in careful rows, were handmade centerpiece arrangements in the exact color scheme of the party, dusty rose and ivory. I know this because I had asked Diane the colors 2 months ago so I could plan my outfit. Lorraine looked up when I walked in and said, "Oh, you must be Diane's mom. So nice to meet you." And then she turned back to the event coordinator and resumed talking. I stood in the kitchen of my daughter's house, holding a red metal tin with 40 years of my family's recipes inside it, and no one offered me a glass of water. Diane came in about 10 minutes later. She hugged me, and the hug was real. I know my daughter's hugs, but it was also brief. She was in a robe with her hair half done, and she said, "Mom, I'm so sorry. Everything is just moving fast today. Can you just hang out for a bit?" And she looked at the tin and said, "Oh, is that Grandma's tin?" And I said yes. I thought we might make the cake together this morning, like we used to. And she paused, just briefly, and said, "Oh, Mom, I wish, but the caterer is doing a full dessert table tonight. Lorraine actually helped plan the whole menu. It's so beautiful. You'll love it." She said it kindly. I know she did. But what I heard underneath it was, "There is no room here for what you brought." I put the tin back in my tote bag. I sat in the living room for the next 2 hours while the house moved around me in a way that had nothing to do with me. Lorraine and the event coordinator moved from room to room with clipboards and purpose. A florist arrived, and then a woman with a lighting rig. Trevor's father sat in the kitchen on his phone, occasionally looking up at a television that was tuned to a golf channel. No one brought me coffee. No one asked if I needed anything. At one point, a young woman I didn't recognize walked through the living room, looked at me, smiled politely, and kept walking. And I realized she thought I was a vendor waiting for someone. Diane came through twice. Once to apologize that lunch was going to be skipped because everything was behind schedule, and once to ask if I thought her earrings worked with the dress. I told her the earrings were beautiful. She thanked me and left the room. I was not asked to be in any of the photographs they took around 2 in the afternoon, when Lorraine and Trevor's father and 3 of their friends gathered in the backyard for what I could hear was a pre-party photo shoot someone had organized. I could see them through the French doors from where I was sitting. Diane was laughing, her head tipped back the way it goes when she laughs genuinely, and Lorraine was standing beside her with one arm around her shoulders, and I thought, she looks happy. My daughter looks genuinely happy, and I held on to that and tried to make it enough. I drove back to my hotel at 4 o'clock to get dressed for the party. I sat in the bathroom with the lights on and looked at my face for a long time. I am 67 years old. I have my mother's eyes and my father's stubbornness, and 31 years of 4th graders have given me laugh lines and a patience that does not come easily but runs deep when it finally settles. I put on the dress I had bought for this occasion, navy blue, modest, the kind of thing a woman wears when she wants to look appropriate and not take attention from anyone else. I put on the pearl earrings Richard gave me the year Diane was born. I thought, you are her mother. You came here because you love her. Go to the party and be present, and let that be enough. The party was beautiful. I will give Trevor that. The venue was a converted estate with string lights strung through the courtyard trees, and tables set in dusty rows and ivory exactly as planned, and the caterer had laid out a dessert table that was genuinely impressive, with small chocolate tarts and raspberry mousse cups, and a 5-layer cake in white fondant with gold lettering. It was a lovely party. It was just not mine to be part of in any way that mattered. I was seated at a table near the back. Not the worst table, there were 4 tables behind mine, but I was 8 tables from the table where Diane sat with Trevor and Lorraine and Trevor's father and their closest friends. I knew no one at my table. I introduced myself and made conversation for 3 hours with 2 couples from Trevor's work and a woman named Bev, who was someone's aunt from Sacramento. And Bev was lovely, actually. Bev had opinions about California water rights that I found genuinely interesting, and I am not being sarcastic when I say that conversation with Bev was the best part of my evening. Diane gave a short speech at some point. She thanked Trevor first and at length. She thanked Lorraine for helping plan everything, and there was a lot of warmth in that, you could hear it. She thanked her friends by name, 4 of them, and said something funny about each one. She thanked the caterer. Toward the end, she said, "And my mom flew in from Ohio. Isn't that sweet?" And she gestured generally toward my half of the room, and a few people near me smiled, and that was it. That was the whole of it. Isn't that sweet? I smiled. I raised my glass when people raised theirs. I ate the raspberry mousse and told Bev it was delicious. I watched my daughter move through the room like someone at home in her own life, which is what I wanted for her, which is what I had spent 30 years building toward, and I kept reminding myself of that. At 10 o'clock, when the dancing started and the lights went lower, and it became clear that the party was entering a phase where my presence would mean nothing to anyone, I found Diane to say goodnight. She hugged me. She said, "Mom, thank you so much for coming. It means the world." Her eyes were bright from the wine and the evening and the happiness of being well celebrated, and I looked at her face, my daughter's face, that I have known every version of, and I said, "Happy birthday, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." She said, "I love you, Mom," and she meant it. I know she did. And then someone called her name from across the room, and she turned and was gone. I retrieved my tote bag from the coat room. The tin was still inside it. I drove back to the hotel. I sat on the edge of the bed again, in my navy dress, with the tote bag on the chair across the room, and I thought about what I was going to do with the tin. I had brought it all the way from Dayton. It had been in my mother's kitchen, and then in mine. It had been promised, in some wordless way, to the next generation of our family. I thought about leaving it for Diane anyway. Writing a note, sliding it under the door before my early flight, trusting that she would understand its value when the noise of the party faded. I almost did. I had the notepad from the hotel nightstand in my hand. But then I thought about something Diane had said, a long time ago, the last time I had visited. We were standing in her kitchen, the white marble kitchen, the brushed gold fixtures, and she had opened one of the lower cabinets to get a pot, and I had glimpsed, at the very back of the shelf, a set of ceramic bowls I had given her. My mother's bowls. The ones she had asked for when she got her first apartment, that she had cried about when I handed them over in a paper bag because she said they smelled like Sunday mornings at Grandma's house. They were pushed all the way to the back of the cabinet, behind a row of identical white Le Creuset. I had not said anything. I had closed that memory in a drawer and left it there. I put the notepad back on the nightstand. In the morning, I got up early and had coffee in the lobby, and then I drove, not to the airport, but to a small church I had noticed on the drive-in from the highway. It was a modest white building with a hand-lettered sign out front that advertised a Saturday community breakfast, and the parking lot had 6 cars in it, and I sat in my rental car for a moment before I decided. I went inside with the tin. There was a woman in the church kitchen, maybe 70, aproned, pulling sheet pans out of an oven, and when I came in she looked up with the reflexive smile of someone who has welcomed strangers before. I told her I had my mother's recipe cards with me for a chocolate cake, and I asked if I could use the kitchen for an hour. I told her I had all the ingredients in a bag in my car. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Honey, pull up a stool." Her name was Frances. She had been running the Saturday breakfast for 11 years. She told me about her own mother while I measured flour and cocoa, and I told her about mine while the batter came together in the big church mixer, and when the cakes came out of the oven 2 hours later, and the whole kitchen smelled like every birthday I had ever known. There were 4 more women in the room who had wandered in from the hall, drawn by the smell of something real. We frosted it together. Not perfectly. Frances's frosting technique was enthusiastic and approximate, and I loved her for it. We cut it and put it on paper plates and brought it out to the people finishing breakfast in the hall, and a man about my age took a bite and closed his eyes and said, "My God, that's a cake." "Yes," I said, "it is." I left the recipe card for the chocolate cake with Frances, the original, in my mother's handwriting. I told her it belonged in a kitchen where it would be used. She held it in both hands like I'd given her something holy, which in a way I had. I kept the rest of the tin. It's on my counter at home now, the way it's always been. On the plane back to Dayton, I did not cry. I looked out the window at the flat geometry of the desert, giving way to the green and brown of the Midwest, and I thought about what I was taking home with me. Not what I had given or not given, not what had been received or not received, but what I myself was carrying. I was carrying 31 years of children who had learned to read in my classroom and still sent me Christmas cards. I was carrying Richard's memory, which did not diminish with time, but only became quieter and more mine. I was carrying the look on the face of the man in the church hall when he tasted the cake. I was carrying the knowledge that I had not needed to perform my love to make it real, and I had not needed the performance to be acknowledged to know it had been given. Diane called me 2 weeks later on a Sunday morning. We talked for 40 minutes, which is longer than we usually talk. She told me about work and Trevor's new project and a trip they were planning to Portugal. I told her about my neighbor's new puppy and the book club I had rejoined. At the end, she said, "Mom, I'm sorry the party was so crazy. I feel like I didn't get enough time with you." And I said, "We'll make time." And I meant it without bitterness, which is the only way I know how to mean things. I didn't tell her about the church. I didn't tell her about Frances or the man with the paper plate or the recipe card I had left behind. Some things you keep for yourself not out of secrecy but out of ownership. That morning was mine. I had made it mine. The tin still smells like her kitchen, My mother's. Flour and something warm underneath it. Something that doesn't come from any ingredient you can name, but from the accumulated weight of everything that was ever made with love in that space. I open it sometimes on Sunday mornings. I read the cards in her handwriting. I think about the people they were written for and the people who will never know they existed. And I think about how love persists in the most ordinary containers in red metal tins with sliding lids, in the muscle memory of how to fold a batter, in showing up to a party uninvited into its center, and leaving with your dignity exactly where you placed it. I flew to Scottsdale and paid my own way. I brought my mother's recipes and a framed photograph and a check I could not really afford. I sat at the 8th table and smiled and made conversation with Bev and ate the raspberry mousse and clapped when everyone clapped. And I went home and baked a cake in a stranger's kitchen and gave it to people who were hungry. I have been a good mother. I know that without anyone telling me. I have been a good daughter and a good teacher and a good keeper of things worth keeping. No party can give you that. No table placement can take it from you. The photograph of Richard and Diane is still in my bag. I haven't decided what to do with it yet. Maybe I'll mail it. Maybe I'll wait. Maybe I'll keep it for a while longer. Some things are yours until the right moment comes, and you know the moment when it does. That's something my mother wrote in the margin of the apple cake recipe, next to the line about knowing when the oven is ready. You can always tell, she wrote, when it's the right time. I'm still learning that. At 67, still learning. I think that means I'm doing it right.